try to ensure the
universalism and social solidarity. I was talking to an international summer school of trade union leaders from around the world, the big shots, right? And I dared to say, why is it that among those vehement opponents of basic income over the years, and I worked in the International Labour Organization for 30 years, so I saw all these union leaders, they were always incredibly hostile to a basic income. I said, why is it? A basic income, whether it's affordable or not is another matter, but a basic income would give people strength, it would give people security. But why are unions against it? At that point, the elderly trade union leader who was chairing his position, said, okay, I think we'll stop for a coffee break now. Because I'd asked a rhetorical question. So we went off for coffee, and when we came back, he said, we'll move on to the next subject now. And an Italian trade union leader, aged late 30s, he stood up and said, wait a minute. I would like us to discuss what Guy said before the coffee break. He said, I've been thinking about it. Why is it? I think the reason is that if people had basic security, they wouldn't join unions. And I looked at him and I said, if you think about that for 1 second, you will realize how wrong that is and how disgusting, even if it were right. But it's wrong. Because only if people have basic security do they feel that they can actually risk participating in society and stand up and fight for rights. Only if you've got basic security. If you're impoverished and vulnerable and insecure, you don't want to risk what little you've got. If you have basic security, then you join. And psychological tests and tests that we've just done in India, where we've been running pilots on basic income, where we've provided thousands of people with a basic income over 18 months. When we looked at this, from beginning to the end of the pilot, people in those villages were much more oriented to collective action. The women were wanting to belong to CEVEA, the group that I work with in India, the Self-Employed Women's Association of Outworkers. They're not self-employed in that sense, they're outworkers. They were motivated to join collective action. Now the unions have to think differently because you're right, they go for the insiders or appear to. It's unfair to a lot of trade unions because unionists, but that's the image. And we have to overcome that.
Okay, yes, we'll take the next question and I'll go all the way to the back here. Certainly to an inside of this house. No? I thought you wanted to ask a question, is that sorry? Somebody want to help me with the microphone, Maya, maybe? Yes.
Hi, thank you for a very interesting talk. I come from the Confederation of Professional Associations, and I think you hit on a very interesting way to approach what we are working a lot with in our union and many others about how to do with all the newly educated on various levels who face high problems getting into the labor market. So, 2 questions first. Or is it more a state-granted social rights thing you're talking about? So, if you want to clarify that. The other thing is, how important is awareness? When I'm working a lot with the last part of the Precariat group, to use your terms, which is new educated, who thought they bought a ticket to a career and now they can't get into the labor market at all. Do they need to know that they're a part of the Precariat? And so that's, I think you know what I'm heading on here, because they all believe that if they just wait 1 month, the job in the central administration will show up, and now they'll be let into the academy, right, of thoughts. So how important is awareness, and I'm really intrigued by the linkage you do with where the Precariat is not so much going against the employers, rather they will go against the state level. And unfortunately, as you said, the employers will be here this afternoon, but that would be a great talk to have with them. I think we will have that talk with them in other forums, so if you could elaborate a little bit on that as well. Thank you.
Well, there are a lot of questions implicit implicit in your question, so I will try and respond, I hope, adequately. I think a basic income is an economic right. And each century has been about developing different types of right. An economic right is one which I have that gives me some economic access to resources or freedoms. Now, a basic income, in simple definition, is a universal monthly income that in extremis you could survive on that basis. It's individual, it's unconditional. That's the essence of it. Now, as I said in my Middlesbrough story, one can have an ethical justification, but one also has an economic justification. We don't have any automatic macroeconomic stabilizers nowadays. The old universalistic plus contribution-based social security system had an automatic stabilizing aspect. If you have a basic income, you can adjust it according to the level of the economy. So you have a base and adjust it. So that has instrumental advantages. But at the micro level, far more importantly, it gives people security. It gives people some degree of control of their time. So that if I have a basic income and I want to spend more time caring for my relatives or my community or whatever, and not so much time chasing labour, I can choose that more easily. I can also spend more time in retraining or whatever it is. I have a sense of control of time. That is very, very fundamental to the Precariat and to the future agenda. The third part is that at the moment we do not have any effective way of redistributing income. Our income inequality has been growing for 30 years. Every week a new report, a new article, a new this comes out saying, isn't it terrible? It's been going on for 30 years. And we haven't had a serious agenda for redistributing income. And the income distribution system, that's why I focused so much on it in my talk, has fundamentally broken down. So we're going to need mechanisms for redistributing the income going to rent. And that is why I strongly support sovereign wealth funds, national capital funds, along the Alaska Permanent Fund model, rather more than the Norwegian, although the Norwegian has been fantastic. But the Alaska Permanent Fund pools parts of the profits, and you could do it on any industry sector that is earning from rental income. Because they're gaining their money simple from regulations, not from anything they do. The regulations have said that anybody who has copyright now has a guaranteed income for 50 years after their death. I don't know what they're going to do with the money, but it gives rental income. So we have to find mechanisms of putting part of that rental income into a capital fund and using it to build up the ability to pay out to everybody like they do in Alaska. When Alaska introduced its permanent fund, Alaska had the highest poverty rate and the highest inequality in any state in the United States. Today, as a result of the permanent fund, which distributes every individual a basic income, it has the lowest poverty rate in the United States and the lowest degree of inequality in the United States. We have to think radically and forge an agenda based on universalism and reaching out to people who are not in labour, although more and more people in labour are not earning enough to keep themselves in decent conditions, but we cannot expect real wages to do the job. Yes, we should bargain. Yes, we should have a living wage. Yes, we should have minimum wages. But let's not fool ourselves that we're going to redistribute income in a big way without new instruments that engage our 21st century imagination. And a capital fund and a basic income do not erode incentives. On the contrary, a basic income gets over the poverty trap. because you get it anyhow. So if I go from a basic income into labour, I just pay the standard rate of income tax. I don't go into a poverty trap. So you have it as a right, and it actually acts as an incentive. In our pilots in India and elsewhere, people who received a basic income work more, not less. And when they work, they're more productive, not less. And they're more cooperative, because they know that everybody's got the basic income. That's the normal human condition. So we have to be really open our minds to the nature of this crisis.
All right, any further questions from the audience? I think I'll take one more. Yeah, there was one there. The director.
Yeah, since no one else took the floor, I just wanted to make a quick question. And I'm considering whether I should pose it a bit as a devil's advocate, because once you invite, when you're the person who's invited you, then you can do that even more. But I was just, what I would be curious about is if you could give us a bit more statistical background to some of the things you've been talking about. Because one of the things that we will see when we look at some of the analysis that we've been making after lunch is that those identifications of precariat, whether you are working for a work agency, temporary contracts, and these kind of things, haven't really matured in Denmark so far. So, to put it in a way, we would say statistically, the precariat is still a very marginal group in a country like Denmark, for example. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be aware of some of the changes that are happening, but what I'd basically just like to ask the question, what kind of statistics do you see around the world, and how big is the precariat in different parts of the world? Because that would be interesting to know, and also the developments. And I'm thinking, with your own background at the ILO, you must have done loads of reports, or written or read them at least, having that statistical documentation, and it could just be interesting to get some insight into, because basically what we're curious about are the trends in the labour market. Yeah, we need the prototypes to understand the trends, but we also need the numbers to really see the evidence. So that would be the question. Thanks.
Well, I felt that I shouldn't, in my remarks, try and trespass on the Danish situation. But one indicator struck me as really the end of your Faustian bargain is coming pretty quickly. Denmark has the distinction, I think this is correct, of having the highest rate of household debt of any European country. That is the precursor of a huge tip into the growth of the precariat. Because if you have further restrictions in your economic situation, a hell of a lot of people are going to go from that debt into homelessness, as has happened in Spain, has happened in Italy, has happened in Greece, it's happened in Portugal, and it's happening in many other countries. And then you've got to realize that the old Scandinavian, Swedish and other models of welfare have long since broken down. My book's been translated into Swedish, and I go to Sweden quite a lot these days, and a huge growth of the precariat in Sweden. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, all social democrats and trade unions looked to Sweden as the nirvana of social democracy. No longer. It's the fastest growing inequality of any country in the OECD. It's got more and more people on social assistance, means-tested benefits, and particularly young men. These are fundamental changes taking place. There is a real shift to dependence on means-tested social assistance. That is a very bad development, because politically you get a utilitarian consensus by your centre-left and centre-right, and if your social security system is not based on solidaristic principles, then very quickly it turns into, I'm a taxpayer, and I'm supporting this person through benefits, so I want to see them cut. So you have a divisive loss of social solidarity. No longer are we part of them, it's we and them. And I think that the utilitarian politics that has emerged in the last 30 years is precisely why the left, the old left, the Social Democrats, have been losing everywhere. They have no clothes. They have no vision. And this is fundamental. So the union's political wing, if you like, is dying, if not dead in many places, and shifting to a neoliberal way. I don't need to tell you about your own government, how far right it shifted in social policy. So I mean, and while I don't want to touch on pain, I think that we're all seeing this. Of course, it's worse in some countries where you have 50% youth unemployment. 50%? That's the case in Southern Europe. When you have chronic underemployment in the sense that people are on zero-hour contracts. 1.5 million British people today are on zero-hour contracts. That means they're hired full-time, but they're only paid for the hours they actually do any work, and many of them never get any hours to be paid. So we have completely false statistics saying that the employment rate has gone up, but actually the growth has been in these people who haven't got any income, but they're in full-time jobs. I mean, so we've got a lot of crises building up. And I honestly think that, while Denmark has been shielded, as I said at the beginning, you're moving in the wrong direction.
I was almost about to... Oh, we have a question in the back? Oh, that's good.
White-collar union, which is primarily, I suppose, some of the people which you're talking about is about services sector, which I think is one of the new sectors where the precarious is growing. But we have this slight dilemma in the sense that a lot of the people you're talking about, the precarious, they're not members of unions. And at the same time, we're a union and we have to represent payers. How do you reconcile that dilemma that the people who are, I suppose, in some sense most need of the union are not members of the union? And how do we do that at the same time trying to represent the members who are paying?
Yeah, I mean, let me say one thing that I hadn't said in the answer to the previous question. I was last year invited to go and speak to the executives of one of the biggest employment agencies in the world, if not the biggest. It employs literally millions of people around the world. And the executives, for some reason, I suppose they want to hear the devil, so they invited me to speak to their board. And it's the only time I've been paid a decent fee for talking, so I took their money without any sense of shame. And I said to them, look, I look around the room, you're the executives of this huge global multinational dealing with labour. First thing I notice is that you're all roughly the same age. Second thing I notice is you're all white men. And the third thing is there isn't a single voice close to the precariat in this room. And us, as representatives and people who are articulating an agenda for ordinary working people and non-working people, if you want to use the old wrong definition, we should be demanding that our voice should be inside those boardrooms and in every other aspect. That point I wanted to make very strong. Now, your question is premised on a very true fact. Every single service area now has that class fragmentation within it. In academia, for example, you get an elite that are subject to transfer fees like footballers, phenomenal amounts of money shift to a university because it gives the university income-earning possibilities. Then you have a salariat, tenured people making a lot of money, and have more and more people down below in the precariat who are fractionals or sessionals. So all these fancy words that are coming up that are describing people who are part of the precariat. They don't even know when their next teaching assignment will be. They don't know what they're meant to be teaching next week, let alone tomorrow. It's a situation of precariousness, and don't let us pretend that there is solidarity within a sector. That's the problem. So we need to make sure that the precariat are represented in all the structures of governance within an occupation. That goes back to my answer to your first question. That we have to think differently, recognizing that there aren't sectors, there aren't even firms, they're different groups. So we have to move in that direction. And as far as the numbers are concerned, I didn't answer that previous thing, so let me answer that. I estimate there are about a third in most of our countries. A third of the adult population are in the precariat. A number of people, including some people doing PhDs in Denmark, incidentally, are now doing PhDs on the precariat. And they are saying, Guy, it's more. And I say, yeah, and I don't want to be accused of exaggeration. Estimates in Japan and Korea have now come up saying it's over 50% in those countries, which, you know, used to be the countries of the salary man, you know. But now they're reckoning, because we don't have the proper data. And that's another thing we should be demanding. Let's have an overhaul of our labour statistics. They're false. So we have to think differently. But the numbers are growing, and according to your definition, you can easily get to 50%.
All right, do we have one last question? Or I think I'll take the privilege of asking it then. Just to sum a bit up, because you said one thing that was very important, I think, and you said that Denmark had been shielded. And I would say, again, to maybe take the labor union perspective or side, saying that we haven't been shielded, we have been holding a shield against some of the challenges that have been forthcoming also to Denmark, and that is probably why we can't yet see in the statistics the pressure coming in from the outside. So isn't some of the answer to why we can't see the direct influence of the precariat so much in Denmark yet, because we have been doing something right, and maybe that we should continue to be doing some of these things correctly? I think one example is that we have a very high percentage of organized unskilled labor in Denmark. We have a union that traditionally, 3F, that's been focusing primarily on unskilled labor. So that's probably, I think that's one part of the shield at least. But aren't we already doing something that we should continue to be doing in a labor market as the Danish? Just to try and end up on a more positive note on this very group story that you started off with.
No, I think the story of King Canute comes to mind. When the waves are coming at you, you could probably build a sandcastle that'll stop the waves for a time. But with globalization being as it is, a small country like Denmark can only build a sandcastle that's strong for a few years. You're seeing your own social democratic government shifting to the right because of its contradictions. You're seeing the failings of the old model. Let's presume that you were doing everything right. You still had a laborist model. You still haven't got a universalist pattern of income distribution. If you have the highest debt of any country, you can't be doing everything right. I mean, I think it's very easy to be smart. I remember talking in Sweden and Finland some years ago, and they said, no, it's all white. Our models will survive. Oh yes, we're doing things right. Go there now. All right? I think we have to realize that we can do more when we are still strong than when we are weak. And now is the time in Denmark to forge, while you've still got collective strength that is the envy of other countries. But I don't think any of you in this room are fooled into thinking our progressive stance is in a strong position at the moment. Therefore, we need a new approach that is more universalistic, more solidaristic, more towards freedom. That's the things, I mean, if we don't answer the call of the precariat. I was in Aarhus recently, talking to a lot of young people. And they understood. So I think we should be very careful not to be complacent. I know you're not complacent, but the question was complacent.
Certainly not, and I think we're all looking for a new approach. I think that's why we're here today, and that's why we are still looking forward to many more hours of this discussion. And yeah, the Precariat, the book, can be bought over here on the stand. There's a few copies that Guy is selling today. Yeah, we have much more to discuss, and we have much more to think about finding this new approach, because that is the essence of why we are here today and why we've arranged this seminar. But Guy, thank you so much for coming and being our keynote today. Give him a hand.